I'm going to cut straight to the chase here. Whether or not Dewy's Adventure is a good game is going to depend on the person playing its tolerance for a very specific game design philosophy. Of all the games that I've looked at for this channel, discussing this one is the least straightforward, but I'm going to try nonetheless. I love gaming history. It fascinates me because gaming is the youngest by far of all the artistic medias. Music dates back to the dawn of humanity. We know for a fact that there were ancient plays, the precursor not only to modern theater but also to movies and TV when you think about it. But video games are different. They're not a tradition that we can date back to thousands of years ago. Instead, they're an extremely recent phenomenon, an artistic medium in its infancy. For this reason, I've been looking at the games on the NES Classic for this channel. It's by far the least popular type of video that I do, but I still think it's important for me to experience this chapter of gaming history. I didn't really get into gaming until a few years ago, so all these games are brand new to me. It's interesting to see not only the progression of technology and graphics, but also the progression of game design itself. I'm not very far into the NES library, but one takeaway that I've already come to is that you can divide these games into two eras, the pre-Super Mario Bros. Era and the post-Super Mario Bros. Era. In the pre-Super Mario Bros. Era, the challenge comes from not only things like the enemies and level design, but also from the controls. Take games like Ice Climber, Clu Land, and Arcade Mario Bros. The Eddies and the Urchins are barely a challenge, they're pathetic really. But these controls, they fight back way harder than any crab with an angry face is capable of. Then came Super Mario Bros., where Mario was an acrobatic wonder who felt amazing to control. These controls were no longer the biggest obstacle in the game, now the obstacles were. You'd see later games like Mario 3 and the NES Mega Mans perfect this focus on level design, but that's not to say the idea of having challenging controls ever died completely. Castlevania and Ghosts and Goblins, among many others on the NES, still had very stiff and challenging controls which were harder to master than even some of these boss fights. Even in modern times, you've got games like Getting Over, which are entirely focused on mastering difficult controls. Which brings us back to Dewy's Adventure, but first let's get some context. This game was developed and published by Konami back when they still did that sort of thing. More specifically, it was made by the same team behind Elebits, also on the Wii. I had no clue what Elebits was, and after looking at its box art, I still don't. Upon booting up Dewy's Adventure, you're greeted to a very strange cutscene whose art style doesn't really seem to match what's on the box. This doesn't look like funny raindrop goes on colorful cartoon adventure. This looks like the Christmas ornaments I get for my mom every year. But even though the tone is a bit strange, the art is genuinely beautiful. I like Mud Brown as much as the next guy, but I always love to see when the late 2000s, early 2010s game artists discover these whole new sections of the color wheel. As for the story, I actually had to look up what the story was because even after playing this, I still wasn't sure. I can see the inspiration from Elebits here. After checking Wikipedia, I'm still confused, but we'll try anyways. A boy starts singing a song by a big tree, and then a woman recognizes the song and begins to tell the boy a story about it. Long ago, there was a little water droplet named Dewy. Dewy lives in a magical land that is protected by the Tree of 7 Colors. See that, guys? 7 colors. But anyways, one day an evil entity named Don Hedron attacked the whole world and the tree with dark water. But he was repelled by the power of Dewy and the magic tree. 1,000 years later, though, this tree is now dying. It transfers the last of its power into Dewy, who is summoned in a last-ditch effort to protect the world from the Don, who is back and ready to get his revenge. So how do you stop Don? Well, you travel through the classic platformer elemental world themes, defeat a boss, and then your big tree starts growing fruit. It's your classic story of magic raindrop defeats potted plant which fertilizes the tree which ultimately takes down a mafia boss. But how's the gameplay? Well, like I said before, this game is mainly based around mastering its controls. When I first discovered gaming YouTube, I was shocked to see how much certain people and critics downright hated the Wii and its motion controls. I love both, and I still do. I always just attributed this dismissal of the Wii to an elitist attitude, that because Timmy's grandma gets to enjoy bowling, that this wasn't real video games. Real video games don't have intuitive controls and are too mature for anything childish like fun and creativity. This isn't AAA gaming, this is enjoyable. Now, I still stand by thinking that's a big part of it, but sometimes the controls in Dewy's Adventure had me thinking of taking my Wii degree and joining this era of gaming journalists in their crusade. Dewy's Adventure is a linear 3D platformer. Think Mario 3D World, not Mario Odyssey. The way you move around in this game is by tilting the Wii remote. Now, the tilt controls on their own don't feel that bad. The issue is the way that the level design interacts with them. Some of the level designs are just too open with not a lot going on, especially in the early stages. As a result, there's basically no challenge and they're a bit boring. This is easy to forgive as it's trying to ease you in, but it does mean that the game doesn't hook you immediately, and my high school English teacher would be very disappointed. Then you got other levels that require platforming that's just too precise for these controls. Combine that with the depth perception issues that naturally come with 3D platformers, and these levels are so incredibly frustrating it makes you want to join the angry gaming journalist mob. But then you get some levels that are just perfect. The level designs seem to be built around the imprecision of these controls, but still contain appropriate challenges that make them a blast to play. One area that particularly excels are most of the boss fights. Most fights give you a nice open space to move around and just enough time to react to the attacks, so they're a lot of fun. The boss rush at the end of the game was probably the highlight for me. So in summary, a third of the levels are just too dull, a third are too frustrating, but another third are absolutely perfect and a ton of fun. Besides the motion controls, the other main gimmick is that you can change the temperature to transform Dewy into either a rain cloud or an ice cube. Rain Cloud Dewy is specifically for attacking enemies and solving puzzles as he can't move on his own. Ice Dewy has a powerful attack at the expense of having much slippier controls. He can also freeze water and enemies, allowing for creative puzzle design at times. This temperature changing mechanic is great and a lot of fun. They use it in pretty creative ways, so it's an A+ mechanic in my opinion. Setting challenge aside, the level aesthetics themselves are often too much basic platformer for my liking, but again, now and then they throw in some creative ideas that are interesting enough to push you to the finish line. The fighting is much the same as well, often too basic, but every now and then you get some enemies that you have to take down in very creative and specific ways. And as I said before, I love the boss fights, and I want to make sure I praise the mid-level bosses as well. They're all great. Throughout the game, you're encouraged to collect these trapped citizens called the Ew. They're basically this game's coins. At first I was collecting all of them that I could, as I assumed this was a standard collect-a-thon platformer. But at the end of each stage, you're given a letter grade based on how fast you completed the stage and how many Ew you rescued. On one of the stages I got a C, which was not acceptable to me as a Wii degree holder. So I went back in to collect the rest of the Ew that I missed, but to my surprise, you restart with 0 collected. I guess they all decided to go back to being captured. Collecting them now felt pointless, as the only reward you get is improving your grade at the end. So I stopped worrying about them and just continued to focus on my speed. This meant that I was a C average student, but we all know that employers only care about experience, not grades, so I didn't worry about it. Another thing you're encouraged to collect are these pieces of heart in each stage. Collect enough of them and you get another extra hit. Given the challenge level at the end of the game, you're going to need all of them, so make sure that you find them. Another cool thing that I want to mention is that you unlock multiple worlds at a time, so this game isn't completely linear, which is neat, but that does mean that the challenge can feel all over the place at times. Also, this game was sponsored by a Nestle brand of bottled water called Aquapod, which was apparently just water but in a fun-shaped bottle. It was designed to get kids to stop drinking sugary sodas by giving them water but in new and excitingly shaped plastic, and there was a Change.org petition to bring it back, which currently has 57 signatures. Alright then. After traveling through all the worlds, you're off to a fun and challenging boss rush, and then to the final boss, Don Hedron himself. He's kinda difficult to beat honestly, and it took me a few tries. The ending is somewhat interesting, so I won't spoil all of it, but it does involve the little Ews coming to your aid, which is great, but I'm not sure why they'd want to help me after I left them behind in both sub-zero temperatures and on the side of an active volcano, but it's appreciated nonetheless. After this, the credits roll. Confusingly, during the credits, a song plays that wouldn't feel out of place in one of those nursery rhyme YouTube videos that's currently raising the iPad generation. I really don't understand the vibe that this game is going for. The song, story, and art direction seem to be aimed at very young children, but parts of the game were giving me, a grown man who has to shave quarterly throughout the day, a bit of a tough time. And that is kinda how I feel about Dewy's Adventure. It's all over the place. Some of the levels are too easy, some make me want to throw my Wii remote into the TV but on purpose this time, and others are absolutely charming and fun to go through. Sometimes the game seems to be for people who need to be told not to put the Wii remote in their mouths, and other times it's for the gamer with sweaty hands who needs to lean forward in his chair to make it through the temple level. It's kinda bizarre, but I do think that makes it pretty interesting to play and talk about. Do I recommend playing it? Well, that depends. Does the concept of a motion control-based 3D platformer interest you? If it does, then you'll probably have a good enough time here for the $10 that it goes for on price charting. If that doesn't sound good to you, well then this probably isn't for you. As for me, it won't go down as one of my favorite games of all time or anything, but I'm still glad that I played it. Even if it isn't perfect, it had some interesting ideas, and was truly one of the most Wii experiences that I've ever had. And at that, I want to thank you for watching Hydrated Gaming. Stay hydrated, and I'll see you next time.